Hi, my name is Jocelyn, and today I'm going to be talking about the C.I.A. approach, which is raising the standard through chapter books curriculum, and I'm going to be relating this curriculum to brain-based learning. So first, I'd like to start off with a couple of characteristics of how our brain learns how to read. And so there's three systems that our brain uses: our visual system, auditory system, and comprehension. Now, our visual and auditory work together in the temporal lobe, as our comprehension comes from our frontal lobe. So we have a couple of different regions of the brain that are coming together in order for us to learn how to read. And so this really helps our brain establish patterns and systems of how we can have different components which help us learn how to read. And so going off of that, if a student is struggling with their comprehension, we can use some visual and auditory cues to help them build off of their comprehension, or vice versa. If a student is having troubles with their phonemes or phonological awareness, then we can use visual aids in order to help them learn that concept. So within my curriculum, the C.I.A. approach, there's two main categories that I wanted to talk about with vocabulary and comprehension. And so the brain fact of vocabulary and how our brain learns how to read is it's really a mental dictionary of how we recognize the print text. So we're using that visual representation of the word and using our comprehension of how we've learned to experience that word or study that word with direct instruction, and using oral and written language together in order to build off of a meaning. And we also have comprehension piece in this curriculum, as well as how our brain learns. And it's a really complex process where we have to take a bundle of words or just one word and access a meaning with it and a context on how it's used within the book or within the sentence. And this, when you're reading a chapter book, this is really key on grammar and how the author is using their language and drawing inferences and conclusions through the mechanical aspects of written language. And so that is something too that our brain is learning how to read, as we're also learning those patterns and those grammatical concepts of writing to relate to reading. There are also, the last brain fact I'd like to talk about is the three phases. So we have pictorial, phonological, and orthographic. And so our pictorial is really focusing on photos and relating that to either vocabulary words, or with younger students, getting them to read a sentence off of a picture. And the phonological piece is really working towards hearing the phonemes and hearing language. So if that's reading a book out loud to a student so that they're learning the right way to say a word, or when you are doing a vocabulary unit, you are teaching students how to read the word as reading it to them and going through the sections of the word as you would see in a dictionary. And the orthographic piece is really bringing those two together and fluently reading and making sure that our comprehension piece is also added to that as well. So a little bit more about the C.I.A. approach that I'm using. It's by Sarah Calling, and she based this out of Washington State, which I'm from. She was a teacher for a couple years and decided that when she was teaching, she wanted to really have an in-depth look on a book for students and incorporate Common Core standards, which we use here in Washington State, in order to help with collecting information, interpreting information, and approaching information. So that's where the C.I.A. comes from. This curriculum is based for grades 3, 3rd grade through 6th grade, but it is awesome when you as a teacher and as an adult learn how to use this way and format of reading. It really helps you as an adult to read a book, and it's actually kind of fun to, as an adult, take notes on a book and interpret the book. So it goes from grades really 3rd grade up until adult. So the publisher is through Peanut Butter Publishing, which is based out of Seattle, Washington. So this is pretty local for me, which I found was another reason why I chose it. And the fact that it was made by a teacher. So this curriculum was made by a teacher. So using it in a classroom, you first go through the gradual release model, and where you are modeling how to do the C.I.A. You're doing it with a partner and then guided, and then it eventually becomes an independent study where students can take this approach and read a book and conceptually understand the book and pick out certain aspects that make the main idea or help them write a summary on it. So first off, it goes with modeling it. And the four main components are collecting information, interpreting text, an author's craft, interpreting with evidence, and then applying to your lives in a synthesis. So the basic study of this curriculum is you break your book into 4 separate sections. And within the first section, you're collecting information, and whether that's the authors, the plot, the characters, things that are essential knowledge to just getting a grasp of the book. And if that means vocabulary, that's what you're doing, and other reading aspects of that. And the second one, interpreting the text with author's craft, this is the second part in which you are starting to apply and analyze the story. So here is the second quadrant of the book, and you are taking time to use comprehension strategies to get deeper thinking. You're focusing on vocabulary that you might not understand, and starting to really think about possibilities of where the story is going. And during the third quadrant, which is interpret text with evidence, this is where usually the turning point happens in the story. And you're looking for specific evidence that supports either your idea of the story or what the author is portraying in the story. And you will teach students on how to really understand author's craft here and use text evidence from the story. Then the last one is where you are confirming and revising your predictions. So you're applying it to your life, or you're synthesizing what the story is about. And this is where you consider how the book really impacts your life. So if it's teaching you a moral lesson, or if it's getting you to think about the future and other aspects in that nature. So once you go through the modeled approach, and with that modeled approach, you are meeting in a common area. All students are involved, and you're reading a little bit higher level text than the grade level that you're at, because you're doing this with your students. So you want to really tone in on that critical thinking aspect and getting them to think more on a higher level. And as a class, we know that students are not all on the same reading level, but because you are reading this book to them and you are walking them through the strategy, you can go at a little higher level text, which is recommended by the curriculum. You also are addressing key vocabulary, and so you're having students highlight or point out words they don't know. You're having discussions about those. Turn and talks are huge in this curriculum, which I think is awesome because it has a lot of stems. So it's giving you prompts actually for students to show students, so it's not blindsided. You're showing the students, well, so if you're like comparing and contrasting, you're telling the student to turn talk, you give them the line of blank is blank and blank is blank, but for the most part they are similar. So you're giving them an actual stem of how to answer it when you're modeling the C.I.A. approach. That way when they go into the guided and independent, it becomes more fluent in their language, and it not only relates to how they talk about a book, but when they write summaries, it also keys in there. And there's also this thing she calls the layered strategy, which comes from the skills and literacy analysts. So you're really asking questions, you're forming mental images. So in the reader's notebook, you're actually asking students to write or draw pictures of what they are feeling the story's about or how they interpret a character. And then from asking questions about the author's purpose to forming mental images about the character traits, the setting of the story, author's craft, so you're really, distinguishing sympathy versus empathy or how a mood is created. Then you go into the determining of importance. So why is it important that we know the theme of the story or how the plot changes or making our text to world connections? So we're helping students identify the importance of the story and understanding sequence and how this author is writing the story and how they organize it. Then we go into making text self-connection, so really activating that student's background knowledge and then further giving them opportunity to elaborate on how the story made an impact on them and how it made them feel when they were reading it, and getting them to really analyze the book. Because the goal is, when you're reading, is to not only understand the book but find a purpose for why this book was brought into your hands and how it really helped you relate to something or maybe learn about a new concept. So layered strategy was really awesome. There's also a lot of written responses for students to come together and practice organizing their thinking, expand it, synthesize it, and reflect on it. So I will talk later about the study, but the reader's notebook is really essential for students to have, so you're helping them record their ideas. After the weekend, you guys can come back and look in your reader's notebook and talk about what happened in the story last week. So it's really a book club that goes more in depth with standards and how to really key in on certain aspects of student learning that are important to learn how to read and grasp the concept of a chapter book. So relating this to brain-based learning, we know that collecting information comes from our hippocampus. So we're able to recall facts about the characters that happen throughout the story, or the importance of the setting and how it relates to the characters and what their situation is. And then with the interpreting text and author's craft, that comes from our frontal lobe, in which we are thinking about possibilities of the story or what the author might mean here, understanding metaphor, simile, onomatopoeia, crafts like that within text, which we have to read as well as conceptualize and really gain what the author is trying to point out in that certain part of the story or at the end of the story, as well as with interpreting with evidences using our frontal lobes, because we're using our working memory and pulling out facts from the story and understanding what those mean. So that's all higher order thinking and using our working memory. And with applying to our lives, again, that can come from the amygdala, that could come from the hippocampus, where we're really drawing on our experiences before the story and our experiences during the story and our experiences after the story. So using the hippocampus to really recall those facts, but also like what the meaning is. And then the amygdala, which controls our emotions. So we're really putting in depth of either our emotions or how the character's feeling. So we're giving those aspects as well. And with this whole process, we're really keying in on learning and retention. So we're learning about, when you're modeling it for the students, you're learning through brain plasticity and increasing those neurons so that the students are learning and developing these skills. And you're really toning in on splitting that book up into 4 quadrants, and it's okay to stop and talk about things. You have those turn and talk stems. It's really getting the students interested in wanting to read more and becoming curious learners, and taking that book and surrounding themselves within that environment of the book. And then with retention, what it really does is teaches you how to read a chapter book and really get in depth of the author's meaning, author's craft, comprehension, which is huge. And we see a lot of struggle in comprehension. So this really helps key in that emotion to want to read. And then when we want to read, we take these strategies of asking questions, understanding facts, recalling facts, looking at vocabulary if we don't know it to better understand the story. And this framework is really how to read. So we are retending this information from modeling it, so students can, when they're in 6th or 7th grade and they have to you get Fahrenheit 451 and you have to read that book and the teacher just gives you questions to ask, they can take this framework and really dive deep into the book, which makes it easier to read as well because you're splitting it up into 4 parts and reflecting on those 4 parts. So it's a good way to take breaks within a story and conceptualize and go back and reflect, which we know when you go back and reflect, you're going back into you're pulling that short-term and working memory into your long-term memory because you're going back and recalling those facts before you go on to the next part of the story. So my background with this was I actually was introduced in my undergrad, and once I found out how awesome it was because we actually did it on a book, I had fun with it. And I actually have used this in my own life when I read chapter books, as well as my situation now where I tutor students who hate reading. This has really been an awesome way to introduce them to how to read a book and how to really dive deep, so they're understanding that a book is more than just written text or a task. It's really the author's way of relaying a story to you and a message to you and how you can relate to that message. So this is where it's helped me, and I'm becoming more familiar with it as I teach it as well. So I'm learning new things every time I go in, like, oh, next time I read this story with my future class, I'm going to know to do this, this, and this, or ask these questions. So it's kind of fun because you as a teacher are also learning every time you read a new book with the C.I.A. approach. So that's why I like it as well. Some major insights and findings was the author or the creator, Sarah, did a study. So they actually did data in Washington State where they took pre-test and post-test before and after the C.I.A. approach, and not only on how students felt about reading, but with their fluency, comprehension, and then their writing skills as well, because this does help with writing. So the study actually found that students were motivations increased as well as their reading comprehension. So students were more apt to pick up a chapter book and read after they had learned how to do the C.I.A. approach. And it did key into increasing student writing skills. So they were writing longer summaries. The summaries were they weren't lengthy in the sense of blabbing on and on and on about the story. So it was really keying in on key points in which you're talking about a summary, which I thought was really awesome. So I do love this curriculum, and I think it's one of those ones where you can pull out in any school district, regardless of what reading curriculum you're already using. You can pull this approach in as your own professional development and say, we're going to take 25 minutes during our hour reading block and we're going to do our book club or our C.I.A. approach. So it goes in with any school. Any school district can use it. Any individual school can use it. It's also a great way to keep kids interested in what they're reading. So I am 100% on board with this curriculum, and I hope that you look more into it and use it in your classroom.